Hi everyone! Welcome to another Instagram Live Conversations with the Community series episode. Happy August! I know we just started the month of August, so hopefully this month is a good one to you guys. Alright, let's wait just a couple of seconds for some more people to join. Today's guest I'm really excited for. Can't wait for you guys to meet him. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and just bring him on now. We have a lot of people joining. Brian, if you can go ahead and request to join the live. Let's see. Let's see. Alright, just wait. Alright, there you go. Hi!
Oh my gosh, we're doing it.
Yes, we're doing it. I'm excited.
How's it going?
Good, how are you doing?
Good. Look at my hair. Okay. Okay. Hello.
How are you?
I'm doing great. Happy, what day is it? Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday. Happy beginning of August. Fresh start.
Excellent. It's my birthday month.
Oh, well, happy birthday month.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, so let's go ahead and just jump right into it. If you can go ahead and just introduce yourself. I know you're involved in so many different things. If you can just share with our audience everything you do. And, you know, it's really amazing. So I want everyone to know more about you.
Great. Well, thanks so much. And it's really nice to be here. It's really great to participate. Yeah. And thank you so much. So my name is Brian Stefan. And yeah, I do a lot of stuff. I graduated from UCLA social work school last year. So I'm a social worker and a mental health professional here in Los Angeles. And for the past 4.5 years, I've been with the Didi Hirsch mental health service, specifically the Suicide Prevention Center. So we run a 24/7 crisis hotline, and we talk to people who are in suicidal crisis or non-suicidal crisis. We support family members or friends who want to know how to help people who are struggling. And I'm also really proud for the last few years to be part of the Los Angeles Mayor's Office Crisis Response Team. And that's a program that started about 20 years ago. That started with the Los Angeles Police Department, and now it's housed in the Mayor's Office. And it's a group of several hundred of us, and we're all volunteers. And anytime there's any death in Los Angeles, we go out and we support the family members right away. And anybody impacted by the death, in fact, anybody who is touched by that tragedy, whether it's a homicide, a suicide, an accidental death, a natural death. So I'm involved in a lot of stuff that relates to suffering and pain, no doubt about it. But I also love what I do, and I've learned a lot about myself. In fact, everything of value that I've ever learned, I know that I learned at the crisis hotline, and I've learned it from callers, learned it from people who've called and are just so honest. And in fact, their honesty has given me the courage to be honest about my own life. It's just amazing working at the crisis hotline and hearing people talk and say things that they can't say to anybody else sometimes. So as you can tell, I love what I do, and I'm really glad to talk about it and spread the good word.
Yeah, that's incredible. We're so happy to have you here to share all of this because you have so many different experiences. It's really great that you're willing to share with us. So if you're comfortable with it, do you mind speaking about what got you interested in going into this path in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. So I didn't have a plan to be a therapist or a clinician or a social worker or anything like that. Although I did have people tell me growing up, why don't you be a therapist? Because, I was one of those people, maybe like you, and I know there's a lot of us, who, when people are struggling, they turn to us, or they talk to us, or they just feel comfortable. I think people maybe felt safe to talk to me, and I wasn't going to judge them. I didn't really know that I was doing it at the time. I would just ask people questions, and I would just try to be as friendly and as kind as I could. So I worked actually in government. I was a civilian in the military, and I did that for a few years. And I thought that I was just going to work a job and get money and see movies on the weekend and take trips and but my plans changed. I lost a good friend of mine to suicide. It was 5 years ago, this past St. Patrick's Day. So just in March, it was 5 years ago she died. And in a lot of ways, she was and is my hero in the sense that she's such a happy person, a joyous person, certainly successful, lots of accomplishments. And it really confused me when she died. And I didn't really understand. And I also was scared. I didn't tell anybody I was scared because, well, I didn't know that you're allowed to talk about being afraid, or allowed to talk about being ashamed, or allowed to talk about any of the emotions we all have. And I was really scared because if that could happen to her, then what does that mean for somebody like me who's not as strong? Those were some of the thoughts that I was having.
Absolutely.
So yeah, and that was what was going on for me. And I just put it out of my mind because it was just kind of too hard to reconcile these things. Like, if she could die that way, then what about the rest of us? So a friend of mine from elementary school, actually, I went to elementary school on Melrose, and she said, you know, there's a place in Los Angeles where you don't need to get a graduate degree. You don't need to be a doctor. And there's an opportunity for you to volunteer and give back and be of service. And maybe given the suicide loss that you experienced, that might be something that there's something there for you. And from the very first day of the training to be a volunteer crisis counselor, I just knew that I had found my tribe and found the kind of people who I wanted to be with.
Yeah.
Even in the training where, you know, we practice with role playing scenarios, all of which are based on real calls. And it just felt so good to finally be among people who nothing was off limits, like nothing was out of bounds. And that's what happens when people do call or use our crisis chat service, because some people who don't want to call or can't call, they can use the computer, which is fine too. And it's just people who want to be honest, and for somebody to just see them. And maybe that was going on with my friend when she died. It's just, will somebody just see me? Will somebody just see me and see what's really going on? So as you can tell, I loved it. And I was a volunteer crisis counselor for a year plus, and I loved it. And I worked more than just the one shift a week, which is our kind of our obligation, 1 4-hour shift a week. And I worked 2 shifts a week. And then I became a shift supervisor, which is what I am now. And it's totally changed my life. It's just complete. And I went back to school to get a
Yeah, you see.
So it's been great. And, I think the old Brian would probably be surprised that somebody like this Brian could talk about suicide and talk about crisis and talk about pain in such enthusiastic, but also in such a life affirming way. But that's the point. And that's certainly what we hear from so many great approaches to suicide prevention or frameworks for suicide bereavement. This is about connecting. This is about life. And even though it is about people who feeling like they can't stay alive anymore,
Yeah.
It's such a life affirming field. It's such a life affirming industry or field or profession, especially suicidology, this field. So that's a little bit how I ended up where I am right now.
Yeah, that's incredible. I'm very sorry for the loss of your friend, but I really appreciate the fact that you turned it into something positive, and now you're here helping other people. Something that really stood out with me was how you mentioned, when your friend, passed, you said you were confused. And, I went through something similar where someone very close to me did have suicidal ideology. And I remember also being very confused and unsure. And, can you kind of speak more on that? Because I know suicide, whether it's you having suicidal ideologies or you close with someone having suicidal ideologies, it's very complex, it's very complicated. So can you kind of share more about that? What have you learned, like, from the crisis volunteering and just, everything?
Yeah, no, and this is like you just reiterated, and thank you. It's like, these are the questions that I had. These are the questions that a lot of people have. And I'm really proud that I can participate in the training academy at Didi Hirsch for new volunteer crisis counselors. And I'm really glad I give the lecture on how to build rapport with suicidal callers. And this is often the first question that we hear in our training academy. And it was certainly the first question I had, is that what do you say? And also what shouldn't I say? That was what I wanted to know. What shouldn't I say? And it was such a relief to me. And again, this conversation here and anybody who listens, it's a great reminder that we can share with others what we know, which is you can say anything. This was the first real aha moment for me, was that I cannot hurt somebody with what I say to them. See, I always thought that I can make somebody worse. Mm-hmm. I always thought that I could make somebody more suicidal or make somebody in more pain. If I was to ask them, why are you thinking of suicide? I thought that that's just off limits.
Yeah.
And just as a quick aside, I remember there was a caller. I mean, I'll just say it was a caller. I'm sure this is many people's stories, and I can relate to this. Mm-hmm. On the anniversary of a death in their family, they called because they said, I just want to talk about my loved one who died. Mm-hmm. And none of my friends, none of my family, whoever I'm in contact with, they said, nobody will say their name. Nobody will talk to me about them. And they said, I'm not suicidal. I'm just calling this crisis hotline. And I was the one who picked up the phone. Yeah. And I talked to them. And they said, I just want to say their name. And I just want to acknowledge that. But everybody else around me thinks that they can't bring it up because I'm going to start crying. And they just wanted to cry. Like, let me cry. Let me cry. And so just to connect to what I was saying before, that when people call and they cry, that's okay. When people call and they feel relieved, and sometimes they start laughing because, we say to them, of course you're having thoughts of suicide. I mean, anybody in your shoes would. And they say, oh, finally, thank you. I just want somebody just to acknowledge. And sometimes, that thing where you kind of laugh and cry at the same time, there's like a relief. They're just like, oh, fine. Yeah. And it's okay to cry. It's not easy, because in our society or cultures or just in life, when I see somebody crying, I don't want them to cry. But sometimes the things that can't come out in words come out in tears, and that's okay. So that was a big aha moment for me, that I can say anything to that person and I'm not going to make them worse, so long as I come from a place of kindness, of humility. People talk a lot about empathy. And for me, it took a couple of years for me to figure this out. But when I was trying to be empathetic, and it wasn't really working for me, I was like, I think I can. And then finally I thought, oh, my empathy is really directly connected to how much humility I can hold. And for me, that's kind of the thing. Humility is the thing that makes my empathy go, because I don't know your life. And the only way for me to learn about your life is to ask you, what's your life like right now? You said that yesterday was really hard. How are things going today? You said that you just ended a 20-year-long relationship. That sounds really painful. You must be exhausted. Tell me more. So this idea that nothing is off limits, including the big taboo topics, like this is something I'm just starting to think of recently. Death is a huge taboo. We don't talk about that. Money is another huge taboo. Huge. And sex and intimacy, like these are big taboos that sometimes people, understandably, myself included, I wouldn't want to tell to even my therapist, the person who was there for us. So I love this crisis hotline. I love the paraprofessional roles that we have, even those of us who do have advanced degrees and are mental health professionals, which I keep repeating because I'm proud that I'm a mental health professional. I'm a mental health professional. But in this role on a crisis hotline, and we're one of the 150 call centers around the country, and soon there will be even more as the new 3-digit number gets rolled out, the new 911 number for suicide, the 988. That's really exciting. Mm-hmm. That we're the paraprofessional, to me, it's like the kind person sitting on a park bench. And just there's kindness and there's no judgment, there's no agenda, there's no baggage. A trained, trusted stranger who just wants to know what it's like on your insides and is not is not really interested on your outside so much. What you do for a living is fine. It's important, but what about inside? Tell me about that jealousy. Tell me about that anger. Tell me about that loneliness. Tell me about that exhaustion, and say anything you want to say, and say the things that you don't want to say too, whatever you like. So, like I said, these simple concepts have really changed my, my life.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's incredible. And I know a lot of people are very, like, to be a crisis counselor is very admirable. So thank you for what you do, definitely. Let's see. Going back to kind of suicide, because I think this is a topic that you did mention is, taboo, and I think we just need to talk about it. What are misconceptions that you've learned along the way about suicide, about what the general public believes about suicide, and just things that just get translated differently and wrong, and can you just speak a little bit more on that?
Sure. Yeah, sure. Yeah, there's a lot of misunderstandings and misperceptions, and a big part of that's probably due to the stigmas, which, as we were talking about before, you can't talk about this. It's the S word.
Yeah.
Just like it's not cancer, it's the C word. It's things that are. One time when I was going through a hard time, a buddy said to me, because there was things I didn't want to talk about, and he said, when you deny something or when you keep something secret, it goes down to the basement and it lifts weights. And I really felt that, and I'm really grateful that me starting out now as a therapist and a clinician and working in suicide, as well as my experience as a paraprofessional and in volunteer crisis roles, there's a lot of people who have been working this for decades, like Stacy Friedenthal at the University of Colorado Boulder, who's a really amazing clinician and therapist and speaker and advocate. And I love when she's talking about that, like having thoughts of suicide alone, like that may be the first question, but that's not the last question. Because and here's a big aha moment for me. When I heard this in the training academy to be a volunteer crisis counselor, and I've heard it over and over again, it's, why am I thinking about suicide? Like, why? That's what people want to know. They call and say, why am I thinking about suicide? Mm-hmm. And what I learned is everybody, and the research and the data certainly supports this, everybody thinks about these things. Everybody thinks about death. Everybody thinks about suicide in the same way that if you go to the Grand Canyon or the top of a building, our minds think about things. Mm-hmm. But there can be so much shame, and we're all lucky that people like Brene Brown are talking about shame and the difference between shame and guilt. And guilt is I made a mistake. Shame is I am a mistake. And the worry that I am thinking of suicide because I made that happen, and therefore I am a bad person. And that's certainly, I can relate to that. And this is also true for those of us who experience anxiety and anxiety spectrum disorders and the intrusive thoughts. This is like, if you think about something, I made that thought. That's such a painful experience. It's fine when the thoughts are pleasant, but when the thoughts are scary or graphic or sexual or blasphemous or pick your taboo, this is what happens when things can become very difficult. Yeah. So suicide really is about hopelessness, absolutely. Helplessness, absolutely. Isolation, for sure. Lack of meaning. And I think that the lack of connection is huge. It's huge. And there's like so many great people that people can read about or watch YouTube lectures or videos like Thomas Joyner. And like I said, Stacy Friedenthal, who talk about this in an open and honest and anyways, but the fact is that this is something we all go through. This is something that we all experience, but we're not allowed to talk about it. That's the problem. But that's hopefully that's what we're doing here today, is that we can talk about the things that we're all thinking about, but we learn along the way we're not allowed to talk about. And talking about suicide is the first step to suicide prevention. And talking about it openly, honestly, in a curious way. Yeah. And in fact, that's what we're doing here. So this is great. This is suicide prevention, what we're doing right now. Yeah.
I agree. And then just really quickly in the audience, if anyone has any questions, feel free to submit them. We'll take a couple of minutes at the end to answer them. But going back to what we're talking about, yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think we just need to be more validating of ourselves of, you know, we have these feelings, we have these thoughts, and it's okay. Like, it's normal, just talk about it. So, yeah, going off of that, like, other than, you know, what we're doing here, what other ways do you think we could go about, you know, just making it okay to talk about this? Like, talking about the S word, making it, you know, it's no longer the S word, but it's suicide and it's okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff, lot of stuff. Let's see. Well, one thing that I think is exciting, it's not unusual, but it's innovative, I think, is there's a Inside LA, which is a mindfulness and meditation community in Los Angeles, similar to Spirit Rock up in Northern California and IMS. So we've started a brand new, and I think first of its kind, and myself and Mariella Bravo and Rosa Maria and Trudy Goodman and a lot of great folks. So we have a new affinity group. And if by affinity group, I mean a meditation, mindfulness sitting group that's specifically for anyone with any connection to suicide. And that's people who have lost somebody to suicide like myself, or people who work in the field, or know somebody who struggles, or themselves have, like you said before, struggled with suicidal ideation. And again, it's just something that a lot of people experience in their lives. People who have made attempts. And we've had 4 of these sitting groups meet so far. We have our next one at the end of August, on August 28th. And it's just nice that there's an opportunity to sit together, meditate, and also reflect and ask some questions and have a discussion about suicide. And maybe that's one of the reasons why mindfulness and secular Buddhism, or even Buddhism, is getting really popular now, is not only what we were talking about before about you are not your thoughts, which is a very powerful and very, again, relieving notion, like thoughts as clouds in the sky and thoughts as, thoughts pass, and this too shall pass. Yeah. And so things like that are great. There's another, I just got a text from a buddy who sent me an LA Times article today about Mike Trout in Los Angeles Angels. And there's an article today about his work in raising suicide awareness and prevention based on a suicide loss in their family. And there was an LA Times article today. There's the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, AFSP, events such as the Out of Darkness Walk, which is a great event so that we can have a sense of community and connection, and literally a walk that we all do, thousands of people in cities all over America. And I did one in San Francisco, where you walk with others who are touched by suicide. And it was an opportunity for me to wear a shirt and have a message to my friend who died on the back of my t-shirt. So there's a lot of great organizations, like I said before, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. I mentioned our, Inside LA, which is really cool, and we had a great turnout, and that's really cool. Other organizations like the American Association for Suicidology, the International Association for Suicide Prevention. We're in a really strange time right now, but there's a lot of people who are looking to help. It's for me, it's always been easier to help other people than was to help myself. Yeah. And that's gotten me through some tough times. And it's also important that I take care of myself. And a lot of these initiatives and programs are ways that we can help others and ourselves at the same time. That was certainly my experience with the Out of Darkness Walk. It was my experience I went through one of the Didi Hirsch grief support groups for somebody who lost somebody to suicide. It's called the Survivors After Suicide Support Group. And, I believe that my participation in this group I helped myself. I healed my wounds and I made meaning out of my loss. And I was able to help others just by listening and being present and hearing about their life and their pain and their joy, all of those things together. So there's a lot of stuff, including, and I'm sure this conversation here, and I expect future conversations that you have with other people, where you ask people a question like, what's the hardest situation you've ever experienced, being a mental health professional, or how did you get into this? And, you might hear people talk about suicide or hopelessness. There's a lot of crises that happen that aren't suicidal in nature, but the feeling like I'm done. It doesn't always have a concrete kind of suicidal, but the feeling like I'm done. And that's something I think we can all relate to. It's just, I just don't want to do this anymore. This is just this chronic pain, this financial situation, my relationship with myself is just so yucky right now. I don't know what to do. This eating disorder, this, me coming out of the closet, this betrayal of this grief, all of these things. And it's, I guess my answer to your first question is, what do we do? Is we can talk about this anytime, anywhere. We can talk about it in schools. We can talk about it in hospitals. We can talk about it on Instagram. We can talk about it at a mindfulness and meditation organization. We can talk about it with our therapists. And if our therapists get a little scared, that's okay. Therapists are trying, this is tricky because we're dealing with hundreds of years, literally hundreds of years of this message that you don't talk about this. And again, it's a cruel kind of situation and tragic irony that the thing that we all could think about and sometimes do think about or experience thoughts of is the very thing that we're not allowed to talk about. Yeah. And it's getting better. We've got a long way to go, but things are getting better as far as openness, honesty, vulnerability, and connection around suicide.
Wow. Whew. Wow. Thank you so much. I resonated a lot with what you said. I really want to emphasize the part where you said, there's so many things to get involved in. The reason why I'm actually here today is because, like I mentioned before, I was very close to someone who was suicidal. Fortunately, they didn't follow through with it, but it was just so confusing and complicated and complex, and it just affected me so much. I feel like my tendency, and a lot of people's tendency who do go through things like this, is to just avoid it and run away and, get out of here. But I think, since I've gotten involved with NAMI and other organizations, it's just become so much easier to talk about it. It's such a healing process, and just, making it known, like, this is okay to talk about, because like you said, at some point everyone does think about it. This is something that we can all relate to, but we just don't, and it blows my mind. Like, it's okay to talk about it. And that's what I'm learning here.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm really grateful that I got to learn about NAMI's, the parent support group the family support group, so for family members who have a loved one who's going through a mental health crisis or a mental health concern. Mm-hmm. And that was incredible for me because I got to feel this thing. And there's pockets of this in our society. 12-step programs of recovery, close friendships, therapists who we trust. It's this sense of safety. Yeah. And safety is, after 4.5 years now, and hopefully much longer, that's the answer. And when people talk about connection as the antidote, or connection as the response to suicide or hopelessness or helplessness, the thing about connection, which is so valuable, is the sense of safety and like emotional safety. Because if I tell somebody, I think I don't want to live anymore, I want somebody who will not tell me how to feel, will not tell me what to think, because I already feel bad enough about what's going on in my mind. Mm-hmm. And I really don't want somebody to tell me what to do. Yeah. And that includes acting on thoughts of suicide. When I started at Didi Hirsch, I was there because I wanted to save lives. I thought I was going to be like an emotional or psychological firefighter or something like that, which would not have been good because I have asthma and I don't want to be a firefighter. But I said, one of my supervisors said, "Why are you here?" And I said, "Because I want to save lives." I said, like, I want to save lives. And she said, "I understand that. And that's why I came here too. But please try not to say that anymore here, because that's not really what we do." And she said, because at the heart of the suicide prevention, what we're doing is we're not saving people's lives. We're helping people to save their own life. And that was the real beginning for me. I finished my training and then I heard this, and then it was, okay, that's because if I'm saving lives, then I don't know if I can last. Yeah. You know, I don't know if I can be that psychological firefighter or whatever. But if I can step into that space, if I can shut up and listen and not just wait for my turn, but really hear and let there be silence. Let them, my supervisor said, "Brian, just because they're silent doesn't mean that they're silent in their head. They're thinking, they're feeling." And I can help people save their own life. You know, why did you call today? You know, how long have you been thinking this? 3 months. How have you been able to deal with this for 3 months? You know, who else knows? You know, when you think about it, what do you think of? It just, and people, once they feel safe, once they feel like I'm not judging them and I don't have an agenda, they can start to talk and they can hear themselves talk. I think that's probably what happens in therapy. Certainly I had that experience when I felt safe to talk and the therapist wasn't going to judge me and wasn't going to make me feel like a bad Brian, like a bad, the way I'm doing my life bad, wrong. All of a sudden I could hear myself talk. I could hear myself say things like, "I think I need help with this," or "I'm lonely," or "I just wish somebody could know what it's like to not be able to sleep through the night." And just, we hear ourselves say the things that we need to hear. And sometimes we get it from other people. But a lot of times we say the things that we need to hear, that we want to hear. But I need that sense of safety. Oftentimes I need that sense of safety. And the crisis hotline is a great place to find that safety, that sense of emotional safety. 1-800-273-8255. And also, not only do we have the lifeline, 1-800-273-8255 talk. That's the last word. But also, as I mentioned before, the website where people can type an instant message, which is suicidepreventionlifeline.org. Suicidepreventionlifeline.org. And a sense of safety. Like, I felt like if I was going through something, I could call you, you know, and I could say, "I feel bad. I'm sad. I'm afraid. I'm ashamed." And I expect, just in our interactions, I expect that you would say, "Yeah, it sounds like this is really hard. Tell me more." Not, I hope, I don't think you would. I think that you would, your first thing that you'd say to me wouldn't be something like, "Well, how can we cheer you up today, Brian? You know, how can we turn this day around?" Well, no, let me tell you why I'm sad first. Let me tell you why I'm ashamed first or afraid. And then we can get to the, okay, what about what's next? But first things first. So yeah, safety for me is a big one. And I'm glad to be part of an organization that really puts a premium, not only on safety today, physical safety, which is very important, but also emotional safety and the safety to say what needs to be said.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. Thank you. Woo, I'm like tearing up a little bit.
No, hey, this is great. And I now I feel like I have to call you when things go wrong. Yeah.
I know we're a little bit over time. Are you okay with answering a couple of questions? Is that okay?
Yeah, I got my coffee. I'm ready to go.
Awesome. Okay, so we'll go ahead and we have 4 questions for you today. Let's see. So we have the first one. How can a person tell the difference between suicidal thoughts and suicidal intentions?
That's fantastic. Well, so now this is a good question, and a question that we would often get at the crisis hotline, because And just to, I may have already said this, but the crisis hotline is so great because people call not only those who are struggling with thoughts themselves or people who are just in a crisis. As I said before, we're a crisis hotline first and foremost. So people who have suicidal, in a suicidal crisis or a non-suicidal crisis. But just to this question here, we also get callers who are calling on behalf of somebody else. My sister is struggling and I'm worried about her. Mm-hmm. What do I do? Or my partner or my boss, or anybody in my life. So how do we know the difference between thoughts and intentions? We ask. And there's some great questions. And again, I invite anybody who's curious about this to know more or has somebody in their life who you're worried about, which is totally understandable. It means you're a caring person. You got a big heart. Mm-hmm. You can call the crisis hotline and say, what do I say to that person? And what we would say to you, and likewise, what we would say to the person who is struggling themselves is, are you having these thoughts? When you have these thoughts, what kind of things come to mind? You know, we also want to know, are these just kind of general thoughts, kind of amorphous? Like a lot of times there's thoughts of, if I didn't wake up tomorrow, that would be fine. Or if I got hit by a bus, that would be okay. You know, there's kind of a general thing, but then there's also concrete plans. And so asking people, do you have a plan? Do you have something set in mind? Now, here's another really great question. In the same way that if somebody goes to a doctor's office and they say, I have pain in my knee, and the doctor says, tell me about the pain, it's very difficult because the doctor wants to know, but it's hard to get a frame of reference. So a doctor would say on a scale of 1 to 5, how bad is that pain? Mm-hmm. And that's good for the patient because the patient can be like, oh, well, I guess it's a 3. And then the doctor knows we can do that too. And actually, well, I say anybody can do that. So on a scale of 1 to 5, how likely are you to act on these thoughts today? Yeah. And then we can start to this great question is, how can we break down the difference between the feelings and the idea and the thoughts and the intention, the likelihood of acting on it? Because again, going back to the Stacey Friedenthal thing and all her great work, is there's a difference between, are you having thoughts of suicide and are you thinking of acting on your thoughts of suicide? So asking about behavior is another good question and a very important question, because asking if somebody's having thoughts of suicide is almost like asking, are you a human being? Have you ever been through anything hard? Again, we're lucky we live when we live rather than maybe 100 years ago, because that's not something we could have been talking about in a conversation like this. So on a scale of 1 to 5, how likely are you to act on these thoughts today? And it feels, and I'm putting myself in the shoes of somebody who's struggling, it just feels good to actually think about that and say, I am at a 3.5. I'm at a 4. You know, it's hard to communicate pain. It just is. Mm-hmm. So, and to say I'm at a 5, and then have somebody at a crisis hotline, like what we do, and we practice what we preach, which is that it's okay to be at a 5 right now. You know, you're allowed to feel how you feel. Mm-hmm. And I want to know more. I want to know more. So the difference between thoughts and intentions and thoughts and likelihood to act on thoughts it's such a good question, and we can ask about it all. And it doesn't have to be perfect as far as like a perfectly constructed sentence, because it just needs to be, you know, nobody wants to talk to a perfectly, like I was saying before, polished. You don't have to be polished. Yeah. It doesn't have to be, it can just be, you know, are you thinking about suicide? You know, are you thinking about thinking about suicide? You know, are you thinking about doing suicide? Like, we can say the things and we can ask follow-up questions. And anybody listening to this can say, hey, I listened to a NAMI interview about suicide, and they said that everybody could and often do at times experience thoughts of suicide. Sometimes when people break up in a relationship, they have thoughts of suicide. Are you having thoughts of suicide? Mm-hmm. Sometimes when people, you know, lose somebody I talked to a kid who lost 3 family members to COVID. Broke my heart. Sometimes when people lose a family member to anything, thoughts of suicide could happen. Are you having thoughts of suicide? So how do we know? We ask. And I'm here to say, and both of us are here to say to people, you can ask. And if you're not sure exactly how to ask and you're scared, call us and we'll talk about it first to give you the courage to just keep going. And it's not that it won't be scary. It's okay that it's scary. It's okay there's butterflies, but we don't have to let the butterflies or any feelings of scaredness stop us, and that's really the only difference between us at the crisis hotline and anybody else is that, and before I started at the crisis hotline, I thought that because I was scared, I had to stop. Mm-hmm. I thought that because I was scared, I had to stop talking. But now I know I can be scared and I can still talk. I can still ask questions. I can still show that person I care about you. And it sounds like you're in a lot of pain right now. And tell me why. I'd love to know why. And if I was in your shoes, I'd feel the same way. Yeah. Absolutely. So great question for whoever asked it.
Yes, that was a wonderful question. Thank you so much for that. Let's see. We've got one more, or a couple more. What is your favorite part of being a shift supervisor at Didi Hirsch?
Oh my gosh. Well, I love I love being a shift supervisor. I love in some senses it's kind of like being a counselor to the counselors, because the counselors talk to the callers either on the phone or on our crisis chat service. Mm-hmm. And the counselors do such a great job. I listen to counselors and they're like so much better than I ever was. I'm just like, oh my gosh, they're so good. And then afterwards we get to talk about it. And I remember I used to go to my supervisor and I said, I don't think I helped. And my supervisor was always so great. I had 2 or 3 wonderful supervisors. All my supervisors were great, all 2 and 3 of them. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to talk about all the things I did wrong. And my supervisor said, Brian, you helped. I mean, you helped in that you asked good questions, you listened, but I said, but I forgot to ask them this, but I interrupted them that one. I said, Brian, you did great. You picked up the phone, you were there. And now I get to do that too. And counselors say, well, Brian, I forgot to ask them what they're going to eat for dinner tonight. And like, or Brian, I forgot to ask them the name of their dog. I was really, and I said, it's okay. You did great. So I'm really glad that I get to still be a counselor, in that I get to show my positive regard, unconditional positive regard and kindness towards the counselors, which is what I used to try to do for callers, because they're so great. Oh my gosh. And we have, a couple hundred, and we have training classes that are going all the time. And we've shifted to remote work right now, so we can take calls during this public health emergency and COVID. And we took 144,000 calls last year. It's incredible. And I'm glad that I get to support the people who are supporting the people who are struggling. And so I'm really glad I get to play a part in that important chain of support and care.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Let's see. All right, 2 more.
Brian, how did you get your hair to look so good today? Is that any of the questions?
That's it.
Okay.
How do we teach children about suicide prevention?
That was a great question. So schools in California, we're doing a great job. Things are getting better as far as school-based suicide prevention initiatives and teachers and staffs. And even in the mental health field, we all are learning and growing and doing better around how do we support our clients? How do we support our people who are coming into our rooms, or groups or families? Now with school, with youth, we have very young callers, 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds. And it's hard, it's scary. And it's scary for me, because, so that being said, if somebody is 8 years old or 9 years old or 10 years old or 12 and having thoughts of, I don't want to do this anymore, that's okay to talk about too.
Yeah.
And I think that having the emotional vocabulary, right, to talk about all our emotions. And some people, I just learned this somewhat recently. Some people say we have 5 basic emotions. Some people say we have 7 basic emotions that that are just kind of baked into us. Mm-hmm. I think I remember 5 because it's easy for me to remember. Mad, sad, glad, afraid, ashamed. Mm-hmm. Mad, sad, glad, afraid, ashamed. And happy, there's synonyms, but mad, sad, glad, afraid, ashamed. And for adults or caregivers or trusted adults around children or youth to talk about their own feelings. I love Mr. Rogers. Oh, I love Mr. Rogers. I can just watch Mr. Rogers videos on YouTube all the time. And this was his message to the kids. Somebody asked him at the very end of his career what he wanted the kids to remember him by. And he said that he could sum up every episode with the quote. He was quoting a French Canadian philosopher, I think he was quoting somebody, and he said, every episode was just about one thing, whether it's you got a fight with your sibling, or you're scared to go to the dentist, or you saw images of the first Gulf War in the 90s that was televised. He said he wanted kids to know if it's mentionable, it's more manageable. That's what he wanted kids to remember. And at the end of his career, a lot of the kids that watched him when they were young were now grown-ups. And he said that that's a message for everybody. So find the people in your life that you trust. Teachers, coach, piano teacher, uncles, siblings, parents, caregivers, whomever. Mm-hmm. And again, emotional safety. The people who are modeling that themselves, probably. It's like the people who are talking about, I'm really sad.
Yeah.
Mommy's crying or daddy's crying because I'm sad today. And it's okay to be sad. And I want to talk. And that's a first step, and not a small one. I think that's a huge step towards having kids having everybody see, oh, this is a person that can handle me, not just at my best, but when I'm not at my best. And I can go and say, I'm sad, can I talk to you? So it's a great question. It's so important. Youth suicide prevention is a big part of AFSP and AAS and IASP, those organizations I mentioned before. And Didi Hirsch. We are involved in a lot of school-based programs. We have our 10 locations throughout Los Angeles. Youth support and helping families and kids and adults. And it's great that I'm really proud to be part of an organization that understands that it's so important that we help anybody who's struggling. Great question, whoever said it.
Yes, thank you. Everyone sharing everything in the chats, thank you so much. It really means a lot that you're so vulnerable and open, and the audience, adding to this is this is what it's all about. So thank you for sharing. Everything is so valid. Thank you. Okay, last question of the day. What would be one message you'd like to share with individuals experiencing grief and loss today, such as death of a loved one by suicide?
Ooh, that's a good question. Mm-hmm. What would be one message you'd like to share with individuals experiencing grief and loss today? Well, this is how I feel about my loss with suicide. And being with other people who, in that support group, in the Survivors After Suicide SAS support group at Didi Hirsch. There's also the Survivors of Suicide Attempt SOSA support group for those who've made an attempt, and we have adult and teen support groups for both that are running virtually right now. It's really cool that we have that capability. For me, my message of hope, experience, strength, and hope, that I can say is that I was worried. I mentioned to you before, when she died, I was scared for myself. And at some point when I started doing all this, I was worried that I would have to forget her to be able to do my job. And I would have to force that out of my memory or force that out of my mind. So after 5 years now, I'm glad that I haven't had to do that. And I've learned that that's not part of my grief. And everybody grieves differently. Being with 7 or 8 people for those 8 weeks, talking about the love they have for their friend, child, parent, sibling, and hearing the joy, hearing the sadness, hearing the confusion, hearing the frustration and the anger and all of it. Because that's what grief is. It's all of it. And now my message is that for me, I haven't had to like close the door on her in my life and in my heart. And this is just the one way that I've made meaning out of her death. Because of what happened to her, I've now learned from callers, from crisis chatters, I've learned from people in suicidal distress. I learned a lot in my graduate program. Everything that up here, I've learned a lot, but in my heart, everything I've learned that's coming out right now, I've learned from people who are struggling with suicide, know somebody who's struggling with suicide, or lost somebody to suicide. So I've learned from them, as I said before, their honesty with what's going on with them has helped me be honest about what's going on with me on my inside. And so my message is that we don't have to keep things to ourselves. We don't have to. And now that I know that I don't have to, nobody's made me talk about what's going on. But once I knew that I don't have to keep it to myself, which is what I thought I had to. And when I started to learn that I don't have to, then slowly I could start looking for the people who I thought could handle me at not my best. And all of a sudden they started to love me for it. And I had somebody say to me after I told them some things, they said, I've never loved you more than I do right now. So my message is that we can do this together. There is connection. I'm here, you're here. There's a lot of people, there's organizations. There's ways for people to even volunteer to, as I've done, as hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people have volunteered at Didi Hirsch and other crisis hotlines. And other support organizations. And we don't have to do this life alone. We don't have to do it in secret. And we don't have to suffer in silence anymore. I mean, that's like probably the perfect question to end on. Yeah. Because we just don't have to do this life alone. And we don't have to figure it out on our own. You know, it's okay that you don't have the answers. I don't have the answers. Nobody gets an instruction manual. Yeah. At the beginning of their life. And so from this field, yeah, I've learned you know, how to live and just how to be with others. So thank you for that question. It's such a beautiful question. And keep asking it, because that's what it's all about. Absolutely.
Oh, wow, that was beautiful. Thank you so much. I know we went way over time. Definitely worth it. Just to kind of wrap things up, again, thank you, Brian, so much for having this conversation, for doing everything you do, for sharing your story. Thank you to everyone in the audience, sharing their thoughts, sharing their stories. This is exactly what we're trying to do, what we need to be doing. So I have so much love and appreciation for everyone here today. Thank you so much. Again, thank you, Brian. And yeah, I'm going to close it out here. I hope everyone has a good rest of their day, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.
Okay, bye. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye.